This is what betrayal costs.
Nothing says romance like driving 3 hours to a cabin with no cell service, where the highlight of the evening will be my mother-in-law's leftover tuna casserole. I glanced at Victoria in the passenger seat, her perfectly manicured fingers dancing across her phone screen, probably posting another Instagram story about our romantic getaway. 20 years of marriage, and she still believed her own publicity. "Dad, can you turn the music down?" Ellie's voice came from the back seat, barely audible over the radio. "Sure, sweetheart." I reached for the volume knob, catching Victoria's eye roll in my peripheral vision. Our 9-year-old daughter had more consideration than my wife on most days. The gas station appeared like an oasis in the endless stretch of upstate New York highway. "Bathroom break," I announced, pulling into the lot. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, complete with flickering neon signs and a clerk who seemed to have been there just as long. Victoria didn't look up from her phone. "Make it quick, Evan. I want to get there before dark." As I walked toward the restroom, Ellie caught up with me, her small hand tugging at my jacket. "Dad, wait." I stopped, noticing the serious expression on her face. This wasn't typical 9-year-old behavior. "What's wrong, kiddo?" She glanced back at the car, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Her handwriting was careful, deliberate. "Dad, turn around now." My stomach dropped. "Ellie, what's this about?" Instead of answering, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a phone I'd never seen before, an older iPhone with a cracked screen. "I found this in Mom's purse yesterday. She left it on the kitchen counter when she went upstairs." I took the phone, my hands suddenly unsteady. The screen was still unlocked, displaying a text conversation that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to have you all to myself this weekend. Evan will be so focused on his stupid business calls, he won't notice anything." The response came from a contact labeled T. The cabin sounds perfect. Remote, private, just like we planned. I scrolled up, my jaw tightening with each message. Explicit photos, detailed plans, conversations that went back months. Victoria and someone named T, discussing not just their affair, but how they'd been using our anniversary trips as cover for their meetings. "There's more," Ellie whispered, pointing to another conversation thread. This one was between Victoria and someone named Lila. The messages were even worse, discussing how Victoria planned to clean Evan out in a divorce, how she'd already been moving money, how T had been helping her hide assets through his company. T. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Trent McAllister, my CEO, the man I'd hired, trusted, made wealthy through profit-sharing agreements. "How long have you known?" I asked Ellie, my voice barely controlled. "A few weeks. I heard Mom on the phone late at night saying things that didn't sound right." Then I found the phone. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. "I'm sorry, Dad." I knelt down to her level, putting my hands on her shoulders. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Ellie. You did the right thing telling me." I quickly took photos of the most damning messages with my own phone, then handed the device back to her. "Can you put this back where you found it without Mom noticing?" She nodded, tucking it into her backpack. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, my mind already racing through possibilities. "We're going to continue to the cabin like nothing happened. Can you text Grandma Sarah and ask her to come pick you up tomorrow? Tell her you're homesick and want to come back early." "What about you?" "Don't worry about me. Just act normal around Mom, okay?" We walked back to the car, where Victoria was still absorbed in her phone, probably coordinating with Trent, I realized. The thought made my skin crawl. "Everything okay?" Victoria asked, without looking up as we got back in the car. "Perfect," I said, starting the engine. "Just perfect." The remaining hour to the cabin passed in a blur of dark thoughts and careful planning. Victoria kept glancing at me, probably wondering why I was so quiet, but I maintained the facade of a tired husband looking forward to a relaxing weekend. The Hartwell family cabin sat on the edge of Mirror Lake, surrounded by towering pines that blocked most of the late afternoon sun. Victoria's parents had bought the place in the 70s, and it showed. The wood siding was weathered gray, and the dock looked like it might collapse if you sneezed on it too hard. "Home sweet home," Victoria said with forced cheerfulness as we unloaded our bags. I was carrying our suitcases to the bedroom when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. Somewhere close, but out of sight. Victoria was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries, and Ellie was setting up her tablet on the living room couch. Did you hear that? I called to Victoria. Hear what? She replied. But there was something in her voice, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. I walked to the kitchen window and peered through the trees. A flash of silver caught my eye, barely visible through the pine branches. A BMW, parked on the old logging road that ran behind the property. Victoria appeared beside me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. Probably just campers, she said quickly. You know how popular this area gets. But I could see her reflection in the window glass, and she looked nervous. Her hands were fidgeting with her phone, and she kept glancing toward the back door. I'm going to check it out, I said, heading for the door. Evan, don't... Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. It's probably nothing. Besides, I thought we could start dinner early. Maybe open that bottle of wine we brought. I stopped, turning to look at her. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never seen her this eager to keep me inside. Since when do you worry about campers, Vicky? She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I just want this weekend to be special. For us. Special. Right. I nodded, playing along. You're right. Let me just grab some firewood from the shed and then we can relax. The relief on her face was almost comical. Almost. I walked toward the shed, making enough noise to announce my presence, but instead of going inside, I circled around behind it. From there, I had a clear view of the logging road and the silver BMW. Trent McAllister was leaning against the driver's door, checking his watch. Even from a distance, I could recognize his perfectly styled hair and expensive suit. The man couldn't dress down if his life depended on it. As I watched, he pulled out his phone and typed something. Seconds later, I heard Victoria's phone buzz from inside the cabin. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just an affair. They'd planned this whole weekend as some kind of elaborate charade, probably so they could sneak around while I played the oblivious husband. But I wasn't oblivious anymore. I made my way back to the cabin, grabbing an armful of firewood for authenticity. Victoria was in the pantry when I came through the door, her back turned, speaking in hushed tones. Told you to wait until after dark. No, he's suspicious. Just give me an hour. She spun around when she heard my footsteps, quickly ending the call. Oh, you startled me. Sorry, I said, dumping the wood beside the fireplace. Who was that? Lila. She wanted to know how the drive went. The lie came so easily, I wondered how many others I'd missed over the years. Ellie looked up from her tablet. Mom, can I text Grandma Sarah? I want to tell her about the lake. Victoria's smile tightened. Maybe later, honey. Let's focus on family time right now. But Ellie was already typing, smart enough to follow my earlier instructions without making it obvious. I'm just telling her we got here safe. I settled into the armchair across from the couch, watching Victoria pace nervously between the kitchen and living room. She kept checking her phone, glancing out the windows, making excuses to step outside for fresh air. The sun was setting behind the trees when Ellie announced she was tired and wanted to go to bed early. Victoria seemed relieved, probably thinking it would give her more freedom to sneak around. Good idea, kiddo, I said, kissing the top of her head as she passed my chair. Sweet dreams. After Ellie disappeared into the back bedroom, Victoria finally relaxed. She poured herself a generous glass of wine and curled up on the opposite end of the couch. This is nice, she said, raising her glass. Just the two of us. I lifted my beer in response, studying her face in the firelight. She was still beautiful, I had to admit. The same high cheekbones and green eyes that had caught my attention in college. But now all I could see was the deception behind those eyes. Victoria, I said carefully, is there anything you want to tell me? She froze, the wine glass halfway to her lips. What do you mean? I mean, is everything okay? You seem different lately. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Different how? Distant, secretive, like you're planning something. For a moment, I thought she might confess. Her face went through a series of expressions, as if she was weighing her options. But then her phone buzzed, and whatever moment of honesty might have existed vanished. I'm going to get some air, she said, standing abruptly. This wine is making me warm. She stepped onto the back porch, and I could hear her voice through the screen door, low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. She was coordinating something. I waited until I heard her footsteps on the porch stairs, then moved to the window. In the darkness, I could just make out two figures meeting near the tree line, Victoria and Trent, embracing like lovers in a bad romance novel. 20 years of marriage. And this was what it had come to. My wife and my business partner, sneaking around behind my back, planning God knows what kind of future together. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both me and my daughter. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to Joe Mancini, my lawyer and oldest friend, then to Rita Santos, my operations manager and the most loyal person I'd ever worked with, and finally to Mike Torres, my foreman, and the kind of guy you wanted in your corner when things got ugly. By the time Victoria crept back into the cabin an hour later, I had the foundation of a plan in place. She found me exactly where she'd left me, apparently absorbed in a book by the dying fire. "Feel better?" I asked without looking up. "Much," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I think I'm ready for bed." I nodded, closing the book. "I'll be up in a few minutes. Just want to make sure the fire's out." She kissed the top of my head, a gesture that once would have warmed my heart. Now it just made my skin crawl. After she disappeared upstairs, I sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the old cabin settling around me. Somewhere out there, Trent was probably still lurking, waiting for another chance to meet with my wife. Tomorrow, Victoria would probably suggest I take Ellie into town for breakfast or go fishing or find some other excuse to get us out of the way. But tomorrow was going to be full of surprises for both of them. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Joe. "It's worse than I thought. Full scorched earth. Are you ready?" His response came back immediately. "Born ready. Let's burn it all down." I woke up before dawn, my internal clock refusing to let me sleep, despite the exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. Victoria was still unconscious beside me, one arm flung over her eyes, her mouth slightly open. She looked peaceful, innocent even. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who'd been sneaking around with my CEO just hours earlier. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Joe, 2 from Rita, and a string of text messages. I slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, closing the door before checking the messages. Joe: "Ran preliminary asset search. You're not going to like what I found." Rita: "Trent's been in the office every weekend for the past month. Thought you should know." Mike: "Whatever you need, boss. Just say the word." I called Joe back, keeping my voice low. "Jesus, Evan, where do I even start?" Joe's voice was grim. "Your wife's been busy. 3 separate accounts I can trace so far, all opened in the last 6 months. And Trent's been moving money through shell companies?" "How much?" "Conservatively? They've siphoned off about $200,000 from your personal accounts, and God knows how much from the business. I need to do a full audit, but Evan, this isn't just an affair. This is a systematic theft." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deeper into my chest. What are my options? Legally, we freeze everything, file for divorce, and press charges. But you need to be smart about this. Don't tip your hand until we have all the evidence locked down. What about the business? That's trickier. Trent's your CEO. He has legitimate access to most accounts. We need to catch him in the act of actual fraud, not just questionable transactions. Through the bathroom door, I could hear movement in the bedroom. Victoria was waking up. "I have to go," I whispered. "But Joe, I want them destroyed. Both of them, completely." "That's what I like to hear. I'll start the paperwork." I flushed the toilet for cover and opened the door to find Victoria sitting up in bed, stretching like a cat. "Morning, handsome," she said with a smile that might have fooled me yesterday. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied, climbing back into bed beside her. "What's the plan for today?" She snuggled against my chest, her fingers tracing patterns on my skin. "I was thinking, maybe you could take Ellie into town for breakfast. Let me sleep in a little, then maybe we could have some alone time this afternoon." Alone time, right. So she could meet with Trent without any witnesses. "Sounds perfect," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Ellie loves that diner on Main Street." Victoria practically purred with satisfaction. "You're such a good father, Evan. Ellie's lucky to have you." The irony was almost too much to bear. An hour later, Ellie and I were driving toward town in my pickup truck, leaving Victoria to her sleep-in. As soon as we were out of sight of the cabin, I pulled over. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" Ellie was staring out the passenger window, her small face serious. "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't know yet, Ellie, but whatever happens, you need to know that none of this is your fault, okay? And no matter what, you'll always be the most important thing in my life." She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. I hate that phone. I wish I'd never found it. Hey, I turned in my seat to face her fully. You did the right thing. You're the bravest kid I know. We drove into town in comfortable silence, but instead of heading to the diner, I pulled into the parking lot of the local police station. Dad? There's someone I need to talk to, sweetheart. It'll just take a minute. Frank Morrison had been a state trooper for 20 years before retiring to become the town's part-time private investigator. He was also Mike's brother-in-law, which made him family in my book. Evan Parker, Frank said, looking up from his desk with surprise. What brings you to our little slice of paradise? I need a favor, Frank. A big one. I explained the situation while Ellie waited in the truck, playing on her tablet. Frank listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. Son of a witch, he muttered when I finished. Sorry, Evan, but that's just... Wow. Can you help? Frank leaned back in his chair, thinking. The affair part is easy enough to document. Get photos, video, whatever you need. The financial stuff is trickier, but if your lawyer's already on it, what about surveillance? I need to know their every move. That I can do. Give me their phone numbers, car descriptions, usual hangouts. I'll have a full report by Monday. I wrote down everything I could remember about Trent's habits, his car, his apartment. Frank studied the information, nodding. This McAllister character sounds like a real piece of work. Expensive tastes, flashy lifestyle. Guys like that usually have other secrets worth finding. What do you mean? Frank grinned, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. Rich guys who steal from their friends rarely stop at just one crime, Evan. Give me a week, and I'll bet I find enough dirt to bury him completely. After leaving Frank's office, Ellie and I actually did go to the diner for breakfast. She ordered chocolate chip pancakes and seemed to relax for the first time in days. It was almost possible to pretend this was just a normal father-daughter outing. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Having coffee on the porch? Take your time. I showed the message to Ellie, who rolled her eyes. She's probably not even at the cabin anymore. Probably not, I agreed. But that's okay. We have plans of our own. Instead of heading straight back to the cabin, I drove to the local hardware store. Ellie followed me through the aisles as I picked up several items. A small digital camera, zip ties, a can of spray paint, and a bag of concrete mix. Dad, what's all this for? Insurance, I said cryptically. The final stop was the auto parts store where I bought a valve stem tool and a small container of fish oil. The teenage clerk looked puzzled by the combination, but didn't ask questions. We drove back toward the cabin slowly, taking the scenic route around the lake. As we approached the turnoff to the logging road, I pulled over again. Want to go on a little adventure? Ellie's eyes lit up. She might be dealing with adult problems, but she was still 9 years old. We hiked through the woods until we could see Trent's BMW parked in the same spot as the night before. The car was empty, which meant he was probably at the cabin with Victoria. Stay here and keep watch, I told Ellie. If you see anyone coming, whistle like I taught you. I approached the BMW carefully, checking for any signs of surveillance or alarm systems. Trent had always been careless about security, and today was no exception. The car was unlocked. I worked quickly and quietly. The valve stem tool made short work of all 4 tires, letting the air out slowly enough that they'd go flat gradually rather than all at once. The fish oil went into the air conditioning intake, where it would create a smell that would linger for weeks. And the spray paint? Well, that was just for fun. By the time I was finished, Cheater was emblazoned across the driver's side in bright red letters. Ellie giggled when she saw my handiwork. Mom's going to be so mad. Let her be mad, I said, taking photos of the vandalized car with the digital camera. Actions have consequences. We made it back to the cabin just as Victoria was coming up from the lake, her hair wet and her cheeks flushed. She was wearing a bikini I'd never seen before, and her smile was the kind that came from more than just a morning swim. There you are, she called, waving enthusiastically. How was breakfast? Great, I replied, helping Ellie out of the truck. The pancakes were amazing, weren't they, kiddo? Ellie nodded, but I could see her struggling not to smile about our morning's activities. Victoria seemed unusually energetic for someone who'd supposedly been sleeping in and relaxing. She chattered about the beautiful weather, the peaceful lake, how refreshing her swim had been. All lies, of course, but I played along. I was thinking, she said as we walked toward the cabin, maybe this afternoon you could drive into town again, pick up some groceries for dinner. I'd love to cook something special for our anniversary. Of course, I said. Anything particular you want? Oh, I don't know. Surprise me. I was planning to surprise her all right, just not the way she expected. My phone rang as we reached the porch. Rita's name appeared on the screen. I should take this, I told Victoria. Work stuff. I walked toward the dock for privacy, answering on the fourth ring. Rita, what's up? Evan, thank God I've been trying to reach you all morning. Rita's voice was tense. Trent showed up at the office about an hour ago. On a Saturday. He's in your office going through your files. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of files? Everything. Personnel records, financial documents, client contracts. He's got boxes of stuff and he's loading it all into his car. Are you at the office now? Across the street at the coffee shop. I followed him here when I saw his car in the parking lot. I thought quickly. Trent was supposed to be meeting with Victoria, but instead he was at the office stealing documents. Which meant, Rita, I need you to call the police. Tell them there's a break-in at Parker Construction. Don't mention that you know it's Trent. Are you sure? I mean, he is the CEO. Not for much longer. And Rita, make sure you get photos of everything he's taking. We're going to need evidence. After ending the call, I stood on the dock for several minutes, watching the sunlight dance on the water. Behind me, I could hear Victoria and Ellie talking on the porch, their voices carrying across the still air. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd hoped. Trent was making mistakes, getting desperate, overplaying his hand. And Victoria was about to discover that her perfect plan had some serious flaws. I walked back to the cabin with a smile on my face, ready for the next phase of the game. By Sunday morning, everything was in motion. Grandma Sarah had picked up Ellie as planned, taking her back to the city under the pretense of a grandmother-granddaughter shopping trip. Victoria seemed relieved to have the house to ourselves, probably thinking it would give her more freedom to coordinate with Trent. She had no idea what was coming. I was drinking coffee on the porch when my phone rang. Rita's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Please tell me, you have good news. Better than good, Rita said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The police caught Trent red-handed yesterday. He's been arrested for breaking and entering and theft of corporate documents. What about the files he took? All recovered. But Evan, you need to see what he was after. Bank records, client lists, your personal financial information. This wasn't random. He knew exactly what he was looking for. I glanced through the screen door at Victoria, who was still getting dressed upstairs. How long can they hold him? Joe's working on that. With the evidence we have, probably through Monday at least. Long enough for you to do whatever you're planning to do. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair and smiled. Trent was in jail. Victoria thought she was in control. And I had all the evidence I needed to destroy both of them. It was time for the main event. Victoria came downstairs wearing a sundress that showed off her figure, her hair perfectly styled despite supposedly being on a rustic cabin retreat. She poured herself coffee and joined me on the porch. Beautiful morning, she said, settling into the chair beside me. It certainly is. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. Actually, since it's our anniversary, why don't we take a selfie? For Instagram. Victoria's face lit up. She loved social media, loved projecting the image of a perfect marriage to her followers. What a sweet idea. She leaned in close, smiling brightly as I held up the phone. But instead of taking a selfie, I opened the photo gallery and selected one of the screenshots I'd taken from her secret phone. Smile, I said, then turned the screen toward her. The color drained from Victoria's face as she saw the explicit text conversation with Trent displayed on my phone. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Surprise, I said calmly, setting the phone on the table between us. Happy anniversary, sweetheart. Victoria's hands were shaking as she reached for the phone, but I was faster, pulling it back out of her reach. How did you, she stammered. Does it matter? The question is, what are we going to do about it? She tried to recover, straightening in her chair and lifting her chin defiantly. Evan, I can explain. Really? You can explain this? I swiped to another screenshot, this one showing her conversation with Lila about hiding assets and planning to clean me out in a divorce. Or maybe you can explain this. Victoria's defiance crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or might have been rage. How long? I asked quietly. What? How long have you been screwing my CEO and stealing my money? I want to know exactly how long you've been making a fool of me. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, but there was still fight left in her. You want to know the truth, Evan? Fine. Yes, I've been seeing Trent for 8 months, and yes, we've been planning a future together. Because this marriage has been dead for years, and you've been too busy with your precious company to notice. So, you decided to steal from me instead of just asking for a divorce? Steal? Victoria laughed bitterly. I'm your wife, Evan. Half of everything is mine anyway. I was just making sure I got what I deserved. What you deserved. I nodded slowly. And what about Ellie? What did she deserve in all this? For the first time, Victoria looked genuinely ashamed. Ellie would have been fine. Kids adapt. Kids adapt. I repeated her words, letting the callousness of them hang in the air. Well, here's something for you to adapt to, Victoria. Trent was arrested yesterday for breaking into my office and stealing corporate documents. The blood drained from her face again. That's impossible. He was supposed to... She stopped, realizing she was about to admit to more coordination. He was supposed to what? Meet you here? Help you steal more of my files? I leaned forward in my chair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and leave today. And you're going to pray that Joe can work out a deal that keeps you out of prison. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden porch. You can't do this, Evan. You can't just throw me out. This is my home too. Actually, I can. The cabin belongs to your parents, and they're going to be very interested to learn about your extracurricular activities. As for our house, I smiled coldly. Well, that's going to depend on how cooperative you are. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find an angle, a way to turn this around. But there wasn't one, and we both knew it. I need to call Trent, she said finally. Good luck with that. He gets one phone call from jail, and something tells me he's going to use it to call his lawyer, not his girlfriend. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. She screamed, a sound of pure rage and frustration that sent birds flying from the nearby trees. Then she lunged at me, her manicured nails aimed at my face. I caught her wrists easily, holding her at arm's length while she struggled and cursed. 20 years of construction work had given me strength she couldn't match, and after a few seconds of futile fighting, she collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. I hate you, she whispered. I hate you so much. I know, I said quietly. The feeling's mutual. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Who is it? Victoria asked, wiping her eyes. Joe. He says the divorce papers are ready for filing, and the restraining order has been approved. I looked up at her. You have 2 hours to pack your essentials and get out. After that, you're not allowed within 500 feet of me, Ellie, or any of my properties. Victoria stared at me in disbelief. You planned this, all of it. You knew before we even came here. I suspected. But you and Trent confirmed everything beautifully. I stood up, towering over her. Did you really think you could steal from me, humiliate me, destroy our daughter's family, and there wouldn't be consequences? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and defeated. What about Ellie? What about her? When will I see her? I considered the question. Despite everything Victoria had done, she was still Ellie's mother. But she was also a thief and a liar who had put her own selfish desires ahead of her daughter's well-being. That depends on you, I said finally. If you cooperate with the divorce proceedings, if you return every penny you've stolen, if you stay away from Trent and anyone else who might be a bad influence on our daughter, then maybe we can work out supervised visitation. Supervised? Victoria, you were willing to destroy our family for money and Zex. You think I'm going to trust you alone with Ellie after this? She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but she didn't argue. She couldn't argue because we both knew I was right. I need to make some phone calls, she said quietly. Make them from the road. Your 2 hours start now. I watched from the porch as Victoria packed her belongings with shaking hands, stuffing clothes and toiletries into suitcases with no regard for organization. She kept pausing to check her phone, probably trying to reach Trent or Lila or anyone who might help her figure out what to do next. But there was nothing to figure out. The game was over and she had lost. As she loaded her car, I called Joe to update him on the confrontation. How did she take it? He asked. About as well as you'd expect. Denial, anger, bargaining, more anger. I think she's finally starting to understand how much trouble she's in. Good. The criminal charges are going to depend on how much we can prove she knew about Trent's activities. But the civil case is rock solid. Between the hidden accounts and the documented asset transfers, we can make her life very expensive. What about custody? With her behavior, and with Ellie as a witness to at least some of it, you'll get primary custody, no question. The judge might allow supervised visitation, but that's about it. Victoria appeared in the doorway, dragging her largest suitcase behind her. Her face was blotchy from crying, her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive sundress wrinkled and stained with tears. "I'm leaving," she announced. "Good." She hesitated at the top of the porch steps, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. "Evan, don't—" I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't apologize, don't explain, don't try to justify what you did, just go." She nodded, her shoulders sagging with defeat, and walked to her car. As she drove away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. 20 years of marriage reduced to a confrontation on a cabin porch, and a woman driving away with her belongings in the back seat. But it was over. Finally, it was over. My phone rang. Rita's name appeared on the screen. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I hoped. She's gone, Trent's in jail, and Joe says we have enough evidence to bury both of them." "There's something else," Rita said, and I could hear excitement in her voice. "Frank called. He's been digging into Trent's background, and you're not going to believe what he found." "Tell me." "Tax evasion, for starters. The IRS has been investigating him for 2 years, and there's more. He's been running a side business, using our equipment and our crews for private jobs, pocketing the money." I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. "How much?" "Preliminary estimate? Close to $500,000 just in the past year." Jesus. "It gets better. Frank found evidence that he's been doing this at his previous jobs too. There's a paper trail going back 5 years, multiple companies, always the same pattern. So he's a serial thief. Looks that way. And Evan, some of the companies he stole from? They're willing to testify. This isn't just about what he did to you. This is about a pattern of criminal behavior." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the past few days finally starting to lift. Trent wasn't just going to lose his job and his freedom, he was going to lose everything, just like he'd tried to do to me. "Rita, I want you to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Full disclosure about Trent's arrest and the evidence we've uncovered. I want him fired, his profit sharing revoked, and his access to everything terminated immediately. Already scheduled for 9 a.m. Mike's been calling the board members all morning." "What about the employees? They're going to have questions." "Leave that to me. I'll handle the announcement, make sure everyone knows this was Trent's doing, not a reflection on the company." After ending the call, I sat alone on the porch as the sun set over Mirror Lake. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt truly peaceful. The betrayal still hurt, and there would be difficult days ahead as we dealt with the legal consequences and Ellie's emotional needs. But the worst was over. Victoria and Trent had made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences. I pulled out my phone and called Ellie. "Hi, Dad. How was your talk with Mom?" "It went well, sweetheart. She's going to be staying somewhere else for a while, but that doesn't change how much we both love you." "Is she in trouble?" I considered how much to tell her. She was 9 years old, but she was also smart enough to have uncovered the affair in the first place. She deserved honesty, within reason. She made some bad choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences. But you don't need to worry about that. Your job is just to be a kid. When are you coming home? Tomorrow morning? And Ellie, I'm proud of you. What you did took a lot of courage. I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo, more than you'll ever know. As I ended the call, I realized that despite everything that had happened, I was lucky. I had a daughter who loved me, friends who were willing to fight for me, and a business that would survive this betrayal. Victoria and Trent had tried to destroy me, but they had only succeeded in destroying themselves. And tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me optimistic about the day ahead. Today, that optimism was mixed with something darker. The anticipation of watching two people who had betrayed me face the full weight of their choices. I arrived at the Parker construction offices early before any of the staff and found Rita already there with coffee and a stack of documents. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, accepting the cup she offered. "Are you kidding? This is better than Christmas morning." Rita's eyes were bright with anticipation. "Wait until you see what Frank dug up overnight." She handed me a thick folder labeled McAllister Investigation Supplemental Findings. I opened it and whistled low. Bank records from 3 different states showing the same pattern of theft at 4 previous companies. A federal tax lien that he's been hiding. And this, she pointed to a particular document. A warrant for his arrest in Nevada for embezzlement charges he skipped out on 2 years ago. So, he's not just a thief, he's a fugitive. Gets better. The FBI has been tracking him as part of a larger investigation into corporate fraud. Our little arrest on Saturday just made their day. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head in amazement. Victoria sure knew how to pick them. Speaking of Victoria, Joe called this morning. She's hired Marcus Steinberg. I recognized the name. Steinberg was one of the most expensive divorce lawyers in the state, known for representing wealthy wives in messy splits. She must be desperate, or delusional. Joe says Steinberg's already trying to claim she was an innocent sufferer manipulated by Trent. Apparently, she's willing to testify against him in exchange for immunity. What did Joe say? That she can testify all she wants, but the evidence shows she was a willing participant from the beginning. The hidden bank accounts are in her name, Evan. She opened them, she made the transfers, she knew exactly what she was doing. At 9 o'clock sharp, the board members began arriving for the emergency meeting. These were the men and women who had helped build Parker Construction from a small family business into one of the region's most successful contractors. They'd trusted me with their investments, and by extension, they'd trusted Trent. I could see the concern on their faces as they took their seats around the conference table. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began. I'm afraid we have a serious situation that requires immediate action. I laid out the facts methodically. Trent's arrest, the evidence of systematic theft, the FBI investigation, the connection to my wife's affair, and her role in the financial crimes. The room grew quieter with each revelation. Board member Sarah Chen spoke first. How much are we talking about total? Conservative estimate, based on what we've discovered so far, close to $700,000 from the company accounts, plus whatever he stole from my personal finances. Jesus Christ, muttered Tom Bradley, our longest-serving board member. How did we miss this? He was good at it, Rita interjected. The thefts were spread out over time, disguised as legitimate business expenses, equipment rentals that never happened, contractor payments for work that was never done, supply purchases that were diverted to his side business. What's our liability? Asked Jennifer Walsh, our corporate attorney. Minimal as long as we act quickly, I replied. We're the sufferers here, and we've been fully cooperative with law enforcement. But we need to terminate Trent immediately, revoke all his access, and begin the process of recovering the stolen funds. The vote was unanimous. Trent McAllister was fired from Parker Construction, effective immediately. His profit-sharing agreement was voided, his company credit cards canceled, and his access to all systems terminated. What about the employees? Sarah asked. This is going to shake their confidence. Rita's handling that, I said. Full transparency about what happened, reassurance about the company's financial stability, and a commitment that we're going to recover every penny we can. As the board meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Trent's being transferred to federal custody this afternoon. The Nevada warrant was just the beginning. I showed the message to Rita, who grinned. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. The rest of the morning was spent dealing with the practical aspects of Trent's termination. It wiped his access to all systems, accounting began the process of documenting the financial damage, and Rita called an all-hands meeting to address the staff. I was in my office reviewing the latest financial reports when my secretary buzzed me. Mr. Parker, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's Lila Morrison. I recognized the name. Victoria's best friend, the one who had been helping coordinate the affair. Send her in. Lila Morrison was everything I expected. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, the kind of artificial smile that came from too much cosmetic surgery. She swept into my office like she owned the place. Evan, darling, we need to talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. By all means. She sat down and crossed her legs, clearly expecting her charm to work on me the way it probably worked on most men. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding about Victoria and this whole situation. Really? What kind of misunderstanding? Well, you have to understand, Victoria was vulnerable. She was lonely, feeling neglected in her marriage. Trent took advantage of that vulnerability. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. So you're saying Victoria was a sufferer? Exactly. She never would have done any of this if Trent hadn't manipulated her. She's devastated, Evan. Absolutely devastated. Devastated enough to hire Marcus Steinberg? Lila's smile faltered slightly. She needs protection, surely you can understand that. What I understand, Lila, is that you helped coordinate their affair. You knew what was happening and you helped cover it up. I was just being a good friend. You were being an accomplice. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. These are transcripts of text messages between you and Victoria, discussing their meetings, helping them coordinate their schedules, even helping Victoria hide money. The color drained from Lila's face. How isn't important? What's important is that you're implicated in this too, Lila. Conspiracy to commit fraud is a serious charge. She leaned forward, her composure cracking. Evan, please, I was just trying to help a friend. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And now you're here trying to convince me that Victoria is some kind of innocent sufferer when we both know she orchestrated this whole thing. Lila was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out her next move. Finally, she played what she probably thought was her ace in the hole. What about Ellie? Don't you think she deserves to have her mother in her life? Ellie deserves to have a mother who puts her daughter's well-being ahead of her own selfish desires. Victoria made her choice when she decided to steal from her daughter's college fund to finance her affair. She took money from Ellie's college fund. I could see that this was news to Lila, and her shock seemed genuine. Maybe Victoria hadn't told her best friend everything after all. $40,000 moved to one of her hidden accounts 3 months ago, so spare me the speech about being a good mother. Lila stood up abruptly, her face pale. I didn't know about that. There's a lot you didn't know, apparently. But here's what you need to know now. If you continue to help Victoria, if you try to interfere in this case or contact my daughter, you'll be joining your friends in federal court. Are we clear? She nodded, unable to speak, and hurried out of my office without another word. Rita appeared in my doorway a few minutes later. How did that go? I think we just lost Victoria's biggest supporter. Turns out even best friends have their limits when it comes to stealing from children. Good, because I just got off the phone with the FBI. They want to interview you tomorrow about Trent's activities. Sounds like our case is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The afternoon brought more developments. Joe called to report that Victoria's lawyer was already backing away from his initial aggressive stance, apparently realizing that the evidence against his client was overwhelming. The IRS had frozen Trent's assets pending their investigation, and Frank had uncovered 2 more companies in different states where Trent had pulled similar schemes. As the day wound down, I found myself alone in my office, looking out at the construction yard, where our crews were loading equipment for tomorrow's jobs. This was what I'd built over 20 years. Not just a business, but a community of people who depended on Parker Construction for their livelihoods. Victoria and Trent had tried to destroy all of that for their own selfish gain, but they had failed, and now they would face the consequences. My phone rang. Ellie's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Dad. How was work? Busy but good. How was school? Okay. Some kids were asking about Mom. I didn't know what to tell them. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what this was doing to my daughter. What did you want to tell them? The truth, I guess, but I don't really understand all of it. Here's what you need to understand, kiddo. Sometimes adults make bad choices, and those choices have consequences. Your mom made some bad choices, and now she has to deal with those consequences. But that doesn't change the fact that she loves you, and it doesn't change the fact that you're the most important thing in my life. Will she go to jail? I don't know, maybe. But whatever happens, you and I are going to be okay. Promise? I promise. After ending the call, I sat in my office for another hour, reviewing the events of the past few days. In less than a week, my marriage had ended, my CEO had been arrested, and my entire life had been turned upside down. But as I locked up the office and headed home to my daughter, I realized that despite everything, I felt more hopeful than I had in years. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed me from a marriage that had been dying for years and a business partnership that was built on lies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, FBI interviews, legal proceedings, the ongoing work of rebuilding trust with employees and clients. But tonight, I was going home to a daughter who loved me and trusted me, and that was enough. Victoria and Trent had gambled everything on their scheme, and they had lost. Now it was time for them to pay the price. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Joe's office reviewing the final divorce settlement, when his secretary buzzed in with an urgent message. "Mr. Mancini, the FBI is on line 1. They say it's about the McAllister case." Joe and I exchanged glances. We'd been expecting this call, but that didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. "Agent Martinez," Joe said, putting the call on speaker. "What can we do for you?" "Mr. Mancini, Mr. Parker, I have some news about Trent McAllister that I think you'll find interesting. We've been building a case against him for the past 6 months, and thanks to the evidence you provided, we're ready to move forward with federal charges." "What kind of charges?" I asked. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We're talking about a multi-state operation involving at least 6 companies and over $2 million in stolen funds." I whistled low. $2 million? Your case was actually the smallest, Mr. Parker, but it was also the most recent, and the evidence was the strongest. The fact that he got sloppy and greedy worked in our favor. Joe leaned forward. "What's the timeline?" "Indictment comes down tomorrow. We expect him to plead guilty to avoid trial, but he's looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." After ending the call, Joe and I sat in silence for a moment. 10 to 15 years, I said finally. "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy," Joe replied. "What about Victoria?" "That's more complicated. She's agreed to testify against Trent in exchange for immunity from federal charges, but she's still facing state charges for the theft from your personal accounts." "And the divorce?" Joe smiled grimly. "She's agreed to our terms. Full custody to you, supervised visitation for her, and she pays back every penny she stole, plus legal fees." "What changed her mind?" "Reality. Steinberg explained to her that fighting this would only make things worse. She's broke, Evan. The legal fees alone would bankrupt her, and she knows she can't win." That afternoon, I drove to Ellie's school to pick her up, something I'd been doing every day since Victoria left. My daughter had been remarkably resilient through all of this, but I knew she was still processing everything that had happened. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she said as we drove home. "Of course. Are you happy that Mom's in trouble?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully before answering. "I'm not happy that she's in trouble, kiddo. I'm sad that she made choices that led to this trouble, but I am happy that the truth came out, and I'm happy that we're going to be okay." "Do you think she'll ever come back?" "She'll always be your mother, Ellie, but she won't be living with us anymore. Is that okay?" Ellie was quiet for a moment, staring out the passenger window. "I think so. Things were kind of scary when she was lying all the time." "You're right. They were scary, but that's over now." That evening, after Ellie was asleep, I sat in my home office, going through the final paperwork from the divorce proceedings. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents and financial statements. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Victoria." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "No, we don't." The response came immediately. "Please, Evan, just 5 minutes, for Ellie's sake." Against my better judgment, I called the number. "Thank you for calling." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "You have 5 minutes. I know you hate me. I know I destroyed everything. But I need you to know that I never meant for it to hurt Ellie. But it did hurt her, Victoria. She's the one who discovered your affair, remember? She's the one who had to choose between protecting you and protecting me. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that. What do you want, Victoria?" "I want to see her. I know the court order says supervised visits, but no! Evan, please! No, you agreed to supervised visits, and that's what you'll get. You don't get to change the rules now because you're feeling guilty." There was a long pause. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "I loved you once, in the beginning. I know, I loved you too. What happened to us?" I considered the question. It would have been easy to blame her entirely, to say that she had destroyed our marriage with her selfishness and greed, but the truth was more complicated. "We stopped talking to each other," I said finally. "We stopped being partners and became roommates. And when that happened, you decided to find what you were missing somewhere else instead of trying to fix what we had. Would it have mattered if I'd tried to fix things instead? I don't know, maybe. But we'll never know now, will we? I'm sorry, Evan, for everything. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo what you did." After ending the call, I poured myself a drink and sat on my back deck looking up at the stars. It was the first time Victoria and I had spoken since the confrontation at the cabin, and it would probably be the last time for a long while. There was a part of me that felt sorry for her. She had lost everything: her marriage, her home, her daughter, her future, but she had made those choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. The next morning brought news that Trent had indeed been indicted on federal charges, just as Agent Martinez had predicted. The story made the local news, with reporters describing him as the ringleader of a multi-state fraud scheme. Rita called me as I was watching the coverage. "Have you seen the news?" "Just watching it now. How are the employees taking it?" "Better than expected. I think everyone's just relieved that it's over and that the company is stable." "Any word from clients?" "A few calls, but mostly supportive. The fact that we were sufferers too, and that we cooperated fully with the investigation, seems to be working in our favor." That afternoon, I was in my office when my secretary buzzed me again. "Mr. Parker, there's a reporter here from Channel 7. She wants to interview you about the McAllister case." I considered it. Part of me wanted to stay out of the media circus, but another part thought it might be good for the company to tell our side of the story. "Send her in." The reporter was a young woman named Jessica Chen, professional and well-prepared. She asked intelligent questions about the case, the impact on the company, and how we had discovered the fraud. "Mr. Parker, some people might say you were naive to trust Mr. McAllister so completely. How do you respond to that?" "I'd say they're probably right," I replied. "I believed in giving people responsibility and trusting them to do the right thing. In most cases, that approach has served me well. In this case, it didn't, but I'd rather be occasionally naive than constantly suspicious. What's next for Parker Construction? We're stronger than ever. We've implemented new financial controls, we're growing our client base, and we're committed to the same values that built this company: honesty, hard work, and treating people fairly." "And personally, how has this affected your family?" I paused, thinking about Ellie and how resilient she'd been through all of this. "It's been difficult, but it's also been a reminder of what's really important. My daughter and I are closer than ever, and we're building a future based on trust and honesty. Sometimes you have to go through the darkness to appreciate the light." The interview aired that evening, and I was pleased with how it came across. Professional, honest, forward-looking. Several clients called to express their support, and I even got a few inquiries from potential new customers. 2 days later, Joe called with the final news. "It's over, Evan. Victoria signed the papers this morning. The divorce is final. And Trent pled guilty to all charges. Sentencing is next month, but the prosecutor is recommending 12 years. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. It was over. Finally, completely over. That evening, I took Ellie out to dinner at her favorite restaurant to celebrate the end of what she had started calling the bad time. "Are you sad that it's over?" she asked over dessert. "Sad about what?" "Being married to Mom." I thought about it. "I'm sad about how it ended, but I'm not sad that it's over. Does that make sense?" She nodded solemnly. "Like when you have to put down a sick pet. You're sad, but you know it's the right thing to do." "That's actually a pretty good analogy." "So what happens now?" "Now we build a new life. Just you and me. What do you think about that?" Ellie smiled, the first completely happy smile I'd seen from her in months. "I think it sounds perfect." As we drove home, I realized she was right. It did sound perfect. Not the life I had planned 20 years ago, but the life I had now, built on truth and trust and love. Victoria and Trent had tried to destroy me, but they had only succeeded in destroying themselves. And in the process, they had given me something I hadn't even known I was missing: a genuine relationship with my daughter, based on honesty instead of pretense. 6 months later, I was at Ellie's school play, watching her perform in the 4th grade production of Charlotte's Web, when I spotted Victoria in the back row. She looked older, thinner, wearing clothes that were nice, but not expensive. The supervised visits had been going well, and Ellie seemed to be adjusting to the new reality. After the play, Victoria approached me in the hallway. "She was wonderful," she said quietly. "She was. She's been working really hard on it. Evan, I want you to know I'm getting help, counseling. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did." I nodded. "That's good, Victoria, for your sake and for Ellie's. Do you think someday we might be able to be friends for her sake?" I looked at this woman who had been my wife for 20 years, who had betrayed me in the worst possible way, who had put our daughter through hell for her own selfish desires. And I realized that the anger was gone. Not forgiveness exactly, but the kind of indifference that comes when someone no longer has the power to hurt you. Maybe, I said, but that's going to depend on you, on whether you can prove that you've really changed. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. As she walked away, Ellie came running up, still in her costume. Dad, did you see me? Did you see how I remembered all my lines? I saw everything, kiddo. You were amazing. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? Absolutely. As we walked to the car, Ellie slipped her hand into mine. Dad? Yeah? I'm glad it's just us now. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. And for the first time in years, I meant it completely.